building if you haven't been in it. A historical building that's been remodeled in a great way. So, but my topic, it says right there, is design thinking for creative competitiveness. And so this design thinking, it's not about just doing it for fun. It can be, at its best, it can be good fun, but we don't do it because we like design or because we like design thinking for its own sake. We do it because it helps us have greater impact on the world. For the for-profit companies, it helps us be more competitive with other companies around the world. And so I want to spend just a short time talking about design thinking, especially as it relates to creativity. When I started my career a long time ago, maybe I stand here, I won't do that. When I started my career a long time ago, it felt like creativity was off at the edge of the business world, but now creativity has gotten to be really, really important in both the for-profit and the non-profit sectors. Right? And as you may know, there's this group called the World Economic Forum. They're most famous for their annual event in Davos, Switzerland. And they did this recent study about the future of work. And what they said was that, if you look at the past, if you look at 2015, there's these, the 21st century skills that they're talking about, starting with complex problem solving. They think these, in the year 2015, these would be the 10 most important skills for your team members inside of a company. But that's the past, and we're racing into the future. And if you look even into the near-term future, in this future of jobs study, what they said is that creativity, which just barely made the list in the recent past, is going to raise up and be in the top 3 most important 21st century skills for people in forward-looking enterprises. Right? And so creativity turns out to be really important. And how are we going to do creativity? Well, the way I know best, wouldn't say it's necessarily the only possible way to make your team be more creative, or to get more creative yourself, or to have more creative confidence. But the way I know best is design thinking. And I'm sure you've had some exposure to design thinking. I would say design thinking is using the mindset or the tool set that designers have been using for decades, but applying it to bigger, more important challenges in the world. And the 3 most important of those tools are empathy, experimentation, and storytelling. And I could tell you, just talk about each of those 3, but some of you have spent some time in this design thinking world, and so I'm not going to go through those basics today. I think those terms are somewhat self-explanatory. Happy to talk to people, at some other time. I've written 3 books on this topic, so you can dive into one of those. But what I want to talk about today is the kind of secrets that, having practiced this design thinking stuff for 30 years in my role at IDEO, what patterns emerge? If I talk to somebody who's already doing some design thinking, who wants to kind of go to another level of advancement, what would be the kind of secrets I would find? If I could find 3 of those, here's the 3 that I would single out. The first one is design thinking begins before problem solving. I've worked all over the world. I've spoken in 40 countries. I've worked with 1,500 different clients, and I would say all of my clients are really, really good at problem solving. But gotta know what problem to solve. And so design thinking, starting with empathy, with a a human-centered process, sometimes you discover the problem that other people aren't paying attention to. And when you do that, and you solve the problem well, it can make a huge difference. It can create tremendous value in the world. So take this photo, for example. Anybody see the problem here? Right? This is just a picture of the status quo. This woman happens to be in France, but I'm sure it is the same for your parents and grandparents here in Hong Kong. This is how elderly people take their medicine. This is people with chronic diseases, or they're elderly, take their medicine. They go to the pharmacy and they get these bottles and they open them up, and then once a week they sort them and put them into these pill sorters. My mother is 92 years old and she takes 16 medicines every day. Is that a good thing? I don't know. That's between her and her doctor. All I can tell you is it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. 16 bottles, open 16 bottles, take them out, sort them into the slots for the days of the week. It takes a lot of time. It's really tedious, really susceptible to errors. As I said, my mom is 92. A few years ago, we stopped trusting her to do this. right? But most people look at that and don't see a problem at all. But a young entrepreneur on the East Coast of the US who ended up being a startup in residence in my company at our Cambridge, Massachusetts office, he looked at that and said, hey, I'm sure I can do better than this. This is not going to be a hard problem to solve. You just got to focus on it, right? And so he went from this tedious process done all over the world to this, which is PillPack, a company that instead of the bottles, once a month, they send you a little roll full of medicines, right? And when it's 8 a.m. on Saturday morning, as it was not that many hours ago, you pretty much know what pills you're supposed to take at that moment. And if you can read that label, it's a little hard to read, it's a mix of over-the-counter drugs and prescription drugs from the doctor. PillPack takes care of everything, right? And so I was talking to the founder, his name is TJ Parker, and I said, TJ, I love your product. It is so wonderfully simple, right? That you know, it's so simple and so easy that I have my 94-year-old father is using it, my 92-year-old mother is using PillPack, I myself am using PillPack. Here are my meds from today. Right? And as I said that to TJ, talking about simplicity, he kind of smiled and he said, yeah, it is simple. He said, but let me tell you, Tom, we wrestle with a lot of complexity to deliver that simplicity. And that's just part of what design thinking is. It's looking at a complex world and trying to make people's lives simple, right? Everybody's got complex lives and everyone will thank you, whether you work for the government or you work for a startup or you work for a big company. If you make life simpler for people around you, they will notice, they will thank you. And so TJ did this, started his little company PillPack only 5 years ago, and talk about creating value. His 5-year-old company was recently purchased for $1 billion, right? So see what I mean? This is not just for fun. Right? You don't do this just because you want to be a designer. In fact, design thinking is too important to be left to the designers. Right? This is for everybody to do, and if you get it right, if you solve problems with design thinking that other people aren't focusing on, that's a big opportunity. Right? And by the way, TJ did a very, very good job of solving those problems, but it wasn't rocket science. The biggest single breakthrough was when TJ decided to solve that problem because no one else had solved it. No one else had paid attention to that problem for 50 years. The big innovation in this space before TJ was when it went from metal pill sorters to plastic pill sorters, which happened about 40 years ago. Right? And so design thinking starts before problem solving is one of the secrets that I discovered from working with it for all these years. So the second one is design thinking helps make big change with small experiments. Let me just say, unless you're like 20 years old, change is always scary. You get people inside of a company, you get, if you're a government agency trying to get people to change is a little scary. And so as I advised some people earlier today, never walk into your boss's office and say, boss, I got the best idea ever. What you want to say instead is, I propose the following experiment. And this works, it turns out, even if you are the boss. So let me just tell you a quick story about one of my favorite bosses ever. It's a guy named Jim Hackett, who's CEO of Steelcase, who embraced design thinking across his company. 100-year-old, big company, and he brought design thinking in. And at one point in this process, he wanted to redo office spaces inside the biggest office furniture maker in the world, right? He wanted to redo the office spaces, and so he said to me, Tom, I have two options. I have the big change option, where I go to my senior management team, who, even though Steelcase makes these open office furniture systems, the senior management team at that point, a long time ago, they're still in private offices with doors that close, which is to say, not using their own products, right? So Jim has two choices. He says, I can do big change. That's where I call my 7 direct reports into the room and I say, okay, I'm blowing up your old offices. You're gonna move out in the open and use our products. He said, I could have done that, but then I'd have every single one of my direct reports coming in to tell me why they're special and maybe other people move that they can't move, right? We call that dragging your feet, right? So I could have done that. Instead of big change, I proposed a small experiment. He said, I called the 7 people into the room and I said, listen, I propose the following experiment. He says, for the next 6 months, I would like you to join me in the open air leadership community. See, he branded his experiment, the open air leadership community. And he's playing along too, right? He's not giving them orders, he's participating. He says, I'd like you to join me in the open air leadership community, and all I ask of you is to give it an honest try for the next 6 months. And then Jim says, and my promise to you, and Jim is a guy of tremendous personal integrity, so people take him at his word. He says, my promise to you is what is not working 6 months from now, we will address it. He never promised they could go back to their own offices, but he said we would address any problem that came up, right? 0 people came into Jim's office to complain or drag their feet. I mean, honestly, how could they, right? Even if your boss isn't the CEO, which part of that could you object to? Oh, boss, honest try? Oh no, that's not me. Try for 6 months? No, I couldn't possibly do that. Trust you and your promise? No, I can't trust you. Like, which part could you say no to? No one did. No one dragged their feet. They moved into open air leadership community, and when I interviewed people about this process, they'd been in the open air leadership community for 20 years. See what happened? Jim Hackett made big change. He just started with a small experiment. And so think about the changes you want to make in the world. Think about the change you want to be in the world. Start with a small experiment. Worked out pretty well for Jim, by the way. He embraced design thinking tremendously in his time at Steelcase. He then, quote, retired. And about a year later, he was recruited by Ford Motor Company to be their CEO. Now, Jim's not a car guy at all. But when Ford, explaining why they chose him as their new CEO, they talked about design thinking. There was an 8-paragraph description on the Ford Motor Company website. I think it is still up if you go see it. The biography sketch of their CEO, Jim Hackett. Paragraph number 7 is entirely about design thinking, mentions either my firm or my brother David, our founder, by name, in the biography of the Ford CEO. So it turns out that design thinking has been really embraced by people who want to move forward, who want to make progress in the world. 3 out of 3 is design thinking encourages you to paint a picture of the future with your idea in it. You know how this works? Like when you're excited about some new thing, some new idea that you have, sometimes you have it, but other people don't, right? And so you gotta find whatever means possible to paint a picture of the future with your idea in it so that others can see it with the kind of fidelity, with the vitality that you see it. And so I'll give you an example of that. We have the great privilege of working with Sesame Street, a very trusted American brand that associated with early childhood learning. And so we've developed a bunch of apps for them for the smartphone. Our most popular one is called Elmo Calls, in which your 3-year-old really believes they are talking on the phone to Elmo. I highly recommend it. But this is a different one. We're working on an app called Elmo's Monster Maker. It's like a game from my childhood called Mr. Potato Head, where people used to start with literally a potato. We had a plastic potato. You put in the eyes and the nose and the mouth. And so in this app, there's a virtual monster, and you put in eyes and nose and mouth. But we had this idea that we wanted to make Elmo dance. In the middle of making monsters, you would touch Elmo's nose, and music would play, and Elmo would dance around, right? And so we really loved this idea, this feature in the app, and our friends at Sesame Street didn't. And so here's where design thinking tells you to start painting the picture. So we had 1 hour. It was 9 o'clock in the morning in California, and we had this meeting, this conference call with Sesame Street. They're on the East Coast of the United States. 1 hour later, and so we've got an hour to make our idea come to life. So what would you do? The business people in the room, what would you do? Bring in your best salesperson. That would be a comment like, okay, Joe, sell them on the idea, right? Make a quasi-compelling PowerPoint presentation. Many people would try to do that. You may have noticed people from the US doing this third approach, which is talk louder in the meeting. As if you talk louder, people will listen to you more. I think the opposite is true. That's not what we did. We had 1 hour, so we painted a picture of the future. We made a 1 hour prototype. In an hour, you can't get Elmo. Elmo lives in the East Coast. Elmo has a professional puppeteer. Elmo needs a green screen. Can't do any of that. We can't get Elmo, we get Adam. So here's Adam playing the role of Elmo. If you squint really, really hard, it kind of, sort of, you can imagine it being Elmo. And we make it an hour, we ship it to the East Coast, we use it in the meeting, and they say yes. Let me just say it, if you are selling anything, including an idea, when you get to a yes, stop talking, right? Your mission is accomplished. If you talk more, you might turn your yes back into a no. So we got to a yes and we stopped talking. We waited 3 or 4 days before we developed the nerve to say, hey, you know that little app feature we showed you back on Monday? There wasn't actually any software there at all. In fact, you know, there wasn't any hardware either. What looked like Adam on an iPhone is actually Adam standing behind a piece of cardboard with a hole cut in it. This is colleague Colita, who's filming Adam on with the webcam on her iPhone, right? But we got to a yes. We painted a picture of the future that others believed in. We did it in an hour, and so maybe your story takes more than an hour to tell, but think if you could do it in an hour, how many ideas could you float in the world? How many ideas would get implemented if you generated a picture of your future every hour? So, if you can just take those ideas to heart, think about the principles of design thinking, empathy, experimentation, and prototyping. Think of those kind of secrets behind the scene about how design thinking starts before problem solving, and about how you want to paint a picture of the future with your idea in it, right? If you can take those ideas to heart and think about design thinking as it applies in your life, in your career, it will go a long way to helping you find your own unique applications for design thinking. Thank you very much.